Thanks, Gloves, and thanks to the Mumblebone team for the opportunity to be here. Yeah, fantastic to be back on Aussie soil. Had a couple of years in quarantine, dealing with the dreaded virus. But yeah, no, awesome to be back, and awesome to see a room full of people keen to talk about sheep, something we do a bit, and something that we love doing. So yeah, keen. So long may that continue. It'll be going on for a fair few hours this evening, I imagine. So hang around and do that with us. Most of my material's been stolen today by either Chad or Henry that works for me, so I've got some different stuff to work on. So yeah, a bit of a different tack from me, but just want to endorse what Chad just said and how he explained that. Really critical traits. For 15 or 17 years, been playing in that sort of condition score space, and I think we're just really understanding the power that we've got at play now, that as we change the sheep and really developing something that's completely new for our industry. I know we're not meant to ask questions, but I want someone to tell me what they do well in their business.
That was succession planning.
Succession planning, awesome. Only got one person doing a good job.
Tom Brown, are you recording at home? Tell me what you do well. Have good people working for us.
Yep, good team, awesome.
Buy rams in the right place.
Yeah, well done, Scott. and listen to the right people, Scott. Yeah.
Extremely interested and observant in what you're doing.
Excellent. Cool. We're not going to dwell on that. But the reason I wanted you to tell me that is because that's something we're really bad at as Australians and New Zealand, or farmers generally, is celebrating success. Really critical in our game to actually sit and think about what we do well. It's really easy to beat ourselves up. We've got heaps of people around us who will help us do that. But really important to think about what we do well in our business. And that's what I want to talk about, the things that I think we need to do well. I've got 2 presentations today. The second one will get more into the business stuff. Anyone heard of imposter syndrome? Everyone's got it. We all think, like we get up here and we're giving presentations, but each of us are always questioning whether we're good at what we do. This is the reality. This is our belief that we know this little bit. Everyone else knows all this other stuff. But the reality is that what you know is just as much as what everyone else in this room knows. So don't sit there thinking my point isn't valid or my question isn't valid. We've all got amazing experiences, heaps more knowledge that side of the room than this side of the room, because you're doing it every day. So never underestimate what you know. Never underestimate the power of a good question, and back yourself. So I want to talk about the things that I think we need to have. Know your numbers. What are we, as a sheep business, and we're all, I'm assuming, in the sheep business, what are the things that you need to know to be able to judge yourself well and be able to know if you are doing things well? So one I want to know is standard reference weight. Condition score, so that's the weight of my ewes, a condition score 3, fleece free and conceptors free. Anyone put their hand up if they know that accurately on their sheep? Three people, 4 people maybe? Why is that important? Because everything runs on standard reference weight, and Chad covered that really well. If we just have weight of sheep as our sort of metric, if it's weight at condition score 2.5, it's a completely different animal than the weight of an animal at condition score 4, because you can change the way that animal performs is massively different. Even if how much I should drench that animal is determined by the standard reference weight. So a really key bit of information. I'm happy to help work it out, but it's basically you go through a heap of mob of ewes, your condition score 150, 200 ewes, and weigh them at the same time, and then work out off that graph where your condition score 3 is, and take your fleece off. It's a bit of a process, but I think it's really valuable, because if that keeps changing, if you don't have to do it every year, but if you do it now and then do it in 3 or 4 years' time, and it's gone up a couple of kilos, that's something that you need to think about, because maybe you think you're going well, but maybe you're just increasing your standard reference weight to be used, and maybe you haven't actually changed that much. You need to understand what's going on at that level. So I think that's a key metric, a key number that you should know in your business, and more people need to know it. Response to nutrition is another cracker. Again, it comes back to that condition score thing. We're going to talk a lot about condition score. But how many extra lambs do you get if your ewes go to the ram in half a condition score higher? Anyone tell me that number?
Lots.
Lots. Excellent, Chad. That's why you're CEO, mate. You're all over it. Again, this is an important number. Why is that important? You You want lambs? So if I want to make my lambs, if I want to make my ewes and have more lambs on board, for some of you, if you're joining early, like if you're part of your business or all your business is lambing in the April, this won't be very high because of the time of year effect, and even your genotype effect might be having an impact. So it doesn't just, there's no money in you necessarily doing anything to join your ewes in higher condition score. Other people in the room, there could be up to 40 lambs per condition score. If you're lambing late, you've got the right genetics, they're enormously responsive to condition score. So when you go to your bank manager and say, I'm going to feed a bit of barley over summer to keep my ewes in good condition because I know I'm going to be able to bank lambs next year and I'm going to set myself up. So if you know this number, you've got yourself in a position to really act well in terms of making those good decisions around when am I feeding, what am I feeding, and why that's important. So again, not that hard to determine. You just need to condition score a heap of ewes and weigh a heap of ewes before the scanning, at joining, and then scan those same ewes. It's a couple of hundred EID tags if you haven't got them in already. It's a bit of a process, but again, something that I think is worth doing once every now and again, so you know where you sit. Because we don't want to be in this position of just guessing or thinking we're average, because no one's average. Everyone's got their own unique enterprise differences. Again, I just talked about how you calculate that. Chad's talked about this one a bit around the impacts of going for wool, and some of that through wrinkle. Another number you want to know is your fleece weight to body weight ratio. How much wool am I ewes cutting per kilogram of standard reference weight? Why do I want to know that? Because across all of wool sheep, the higher the number goes, the less lambs you're going to wean, unless you do something about it. So going for high fleece weight at the same body weight puts those sheep under nutritional pressure or under physiological pressure. This is data out of the Lifetime Productivity Project from AWI. This is a Balmoral flock. And so this is increasing fleece weight to body weight ratio. So 12% is 6 kilos on a 50 kilo animal versus 10%, which is 5 kilos on a 50 kilo animal. When you increase that, and each dot is a sire group of progeny. So this is their fleece ratio, and this is their lamb weaning percentage. That's a pretty tight line. There's a few dots around it. There's one that's just crap at both, and there's one that's sort of okay at both. But generally, as we jam up fleece weight to body weight ratio, we are making it harder and harder to have lambs. Doesn't mean you can't do both, doesn't mean you can't feed your way out of your situation, but those sheep are running in the same situation, so same environment. And so that's what that's at play. So again, know that number, know whether you should be expecting 90% lambs or you should be expecting 120% lambs because of that number. And then breed your way into a position that means you're always going to have those lambs if that's part of your breeding objective. This one's hard to measure, so, but it's something that's important, and we're going to get onto a way that you can look at it soon. But this whole body energy that Chad was talking about, the genetic condition score, fat to weight ratio, however you look at that, it is such a critical part of running sheep in most places where sheep get run. If it's decent country, someone generally does something other than run sheep on it. The sheep get pushed into the places where other things don't happen. So generally, we're expecting our sheep to carry some version of good, so the spring, or a nutritional period through to a time that's not so good. And so having fat to weight ratio, having a haystack on the back is a really critical part of doing that. Not sure if this thing's working or not. Yeah, right. So really that's So the only way you can do that is buy the rams that you've purchased and do a sire team audit. Again, that's only if you've got if you've been buying from someone with ASBVs. And we'll talk about how you can do that if you haven't. And here we are now. So for a while, so sheep's HRC, so about, 30 or 40 million bucks of your hard-earned grower levies plus some government, your hard-earned taxes, invested in developing genomics for the sheep industry. Massive investment, massive opportunity that sits there now. So what this thing is a flock profile test. That is 20 samples of ear from your young ewes, sent away, come back and tell you what the average of your ewe flock is. Massively powerful benchmark for the sheep industry. I'll try and zoom that up a bit. So essentially what it's telling you, is where you sit compared to the average of the industry. The red lines on each of these traits are the average of the industry. Is the average of the industry, and then the green lines are your flock average. This one's not a bad one, but you get micron, CV, staple length, clean fleece weight, post-weaning weight, so early growth, yearling weight, muscle, fat, breech wrinkle, worm egg count, curvature, and then a useless index that Henry will talk about. But we've got all this stuff. So all that stuff that Chad was just talking about, you can actually send away and have a really good benchmark on what's going on in your flock. I reckon this thing is the most important thing. If you're sitting there in the crowd going, I don't really know what my sheep are like, my studbreeder tells me they're pretty good. This is a great way of knowing whether they're good and knowing what better is and knowing where you sit in that front. So that, yeah, I can't spend enough time on that one, I reckon. If you haven't got that answer, how many people in the room have done a flock profile test? Was it useful? Nod, that's good. Yep, excellent. So there's a few more to go, but yeah, I think it's worth doing. It's worth doing every now and again. I heard a bloke the other day in South Australia tell me that if a ram breeder tries and sells him some rams, he just says, give me 20 TSUs of your ewe flock and I'll tell you whether I'm going to buy your rams or not, which is a really good way to start. We can actually start getting some real information around that, because normally in that position, you don't know what's feed and what is genetics. We're always farming the same genetics in your environment. You don't know what the power of genetics is. One of the best things I can do to young people that work for me is to throw them into some sort of progeny test. Will Gibson, who's not here, luckily for us this evening, the first job I gave him when he worked for me when I was working for New Zealand Merino was to run the CPT, and it changed him completely because he saw those genetics running in the same environment, but the power of genes. So doing this gives you a really good look. If you really want to change your mindset, run a progeny test on farm. Set it up properly, get a bit of help to do that, and run that progeny test and see how the power of genes plays in your farm, and you'll be blown away. Scanning index is something the Kiwis focus on. It's percent scanning per kilogram of ewe. It's similar to that response to nutrition thing. It is something to calculate every year. So again, if you know your standard reference weight, you can do that. If you're weighing some sheep, you can do that. What we're talking about, all of this presentation, is we have to start treating our businesses like businesses. We have to measure stuff, because if we can't measure it, we can't change it. But this one is, so scanning percentage divided by the weight of the ewes at scanning, and calculate that each year. It's just a good metric to see how your management's going. If you've got a couple of different farms, to compare those, because it takes into account a few things. So something to look into. Lamb wastage, probably the most important thing for you to calculate every year. You can't do it if you're not pregnancy scanning, but really important. This is the number of fetuses we lose between when we count them, what the potential is, and you would have heard this message a million times in the industry, but it can't be said often enough. It's great to scan big numbers and whack it on Twitter or go into the pub and talk about it, but really none of us get paid until those lambs are being sold. And in lots of businesses, a big number between what is conceived and what is actually turns out. And they're not disappearing, they're not vanishing, they're not being absorbed, they're dying in the paddock due to the nutrition of their mother often. There's no magic bullets. Some people will have a genuine eagle or pig problem, but generally we can set that system up way better by managing our ewes. And so easily calculated, you just got to basically divide the number of dead lambs by those that lived, or the total that were there at scanning. There's people in New Zealand getting that down to 16 or 17%. There might be people in the room doing that. There'll be other people in the industry are sitting at 30, 35%. 30 or 35% of the fetuses conceived are dead within 48 hours of being born. That's a big number. That's not pretty for our industry, and it's not pretty for your bank account. So I reckon I think there's four, I'm going to guess. Yeah, there's 4 key skills. As Glove said, this presentation hasn't been in ink very long. I reckon there's 4 key skills you need to have or employ. You don't have to have them in your business. You can get them in temporarily to do that job, or you can employ people that do the job for you. You don't have to do it yourself. But the 4 things that you must be able to do. One is condition scoring. How many people can back themselves condition scoring a ewe? Ooh, got a good number. Awesome. Did I say accurately, or did I say we could do it? That's great. There's a big roll of hands there. There might have been lots of people who do lifetime ewe management, hopefully, or have done similar programs where you got yourself honed. A lot of people are good at doing it or have done it. You need to keep doing it. It's something that often you'll see it, you'll do it, and you'll change your management as a result. And then you might go, oh, well, they'll be right this year. They're out in the hill, I won't bring them in. There's always something to be learned by getting your hand on sheep accurately. There's that great lifetime ewe management app. I don't know if you've used it, but really good at for getting that average condition score of a mob. Most of your year, you only need to do 50 of the mob when they're in the yards for something else, because you want to know where they sit as a mob. There's a couple of times in a year where you're doing individuals is powerful. If you think they're going to be in poorer condition, if you've condition score 50 of them, they're sitting under condition score 3, then there's money in going through them. When are those 2 times of the year, do you reckon?
Pre-lambing.
Pre-joining, pre-lambing. So pre-lambing, so post-pregnancy scanning is the number 1 time. So that's the time when you've got something to do with you can do something with skinny twins. Skinny twins are your highest return per dollar or per kilogram of grass. Skinny twin ewes are the best return you can do on your farm grazing systems. It's about $1.50 per kilogram dry matter you can make out of putting half a condition score on skinny twins. Massive amount of money to be made out of those. So if they exist, you need to know who they are, and you identify them straight after scanning. You've got time to get them back up. You've got sort of 60, 70 days between scanning and lambing, and so you've got an opportunity to get those twin-bearing ewes up. You would have heard that message, but really it is absolutely critical. The other time is weaning, because then you've got the opportunity to separate again those skinny ewes off, because you've got time at weaning. Often you've still got a bit of grass around, or you've still got an opportunity to lift those ewes. If you leave it later than that, often you're having to feed grain to put weight back on ewes, and that never pays. It never pays to feed grain to a ewe to put condition on her to get scanning out of her. It pays to maintain her weight, make sure she doesn't slide down too much. But if you leave it late and then try and feedlot them up to get lambs on the ground, that won't pay. So you need to do that early so you can try and get some condition back on before the season dries out further, or before the quality drops off. So key skill, good to have lots of people in the room that have done it. I encourage you to continue to have that as part of your business, because there's money in that. Chad talked about how if we set our sheep up right, we can probably put that skill away, but the gibs are down. Even in that system, if you're going to milk the value of that new sheep type, you have to be running that at the right stocking rate, and you can't run that at the right stocking rate unless you're condition scoring those ewes. Feed and energy budgeting. Again, if you're doing that condition scoring, you've got the right. That's a key skill to have in your business. You don't have to do it yourself. You can pay people to do it, or you can get someone in that does it. But we've got massive difference in variation of the ME required per head per day across our businesses. Dry sheep needing 8 megs, and then twin bearing ewes on sort of in peak lactation up over 25, 26 kilos. If you've got heavier ewes or composites or whatever, even bigger than that, up over 30. Massive difference. Again, if you know your standard reference weight, you know your pre-scanning, you know where your skinny twins are, you can calculate this stuff. We're running businesses, and we need to be really good at knowing our numbers. And this is one of those skills that I think you need to have. Again, it's not that hard. The Lifetime Ewe Management app that AWI developed is a good one to do this as well. You put all your numbers in, it'll tell you the number. Probably the one that obviously should have started with is ram selection using data. We're going to go out there, you're going to have a heap of information at you. Some of you are going to be really comfortable in that world. Some of you are going to be looking at all that stuff like it's in Spanish. It'll be a whole different language for you, and that's fine. We just need to either get that skill yourself, and you can upskill yourself, or get someone in to help, because understanding that information is critical. We're long gone are the days where that big tin shed in Bendigo, where you're walking around looking at a micron and possibly a fleece weight, trying to understand which of those sheep are going to make you the most money on your farm is impossible. With this breeding values, you still look at all the stuff that's important to you, but you use these numbers to separate out what is right for you and what is wrong for you. Henry is going to talk to you in a minute about how we go about that with developing indexes to help weight those different traits for individual people, and that can really hone that process. But such a great opportunity that we have now that we've got breeders really focused on giving us data. If we don't utilise that data, we're absolutely letting ourselves down and letting our futures down. And then if you are getting right into it, new data collection and selection. So we've got EID will be mandatory pretty shortly with FMD on the doorstep. But if you are going to start to measure stuff, what we often do is do this, fleece weight and micron. I see that a bit. So people start, all right, we're really going to crank this ewe flock up. So I get down and I start weighing fleeces and I start getting microns. What happens if I do that? Start killing lambs. Right. Start killing lambs. I also start selecting early born singles. So single born lambs have higher fleece weight and lower microns just because of they were born as a single. So massive opportunity. So massive risk that when I actually do that, I go out there and select those ewes based on some information. So I give myself a pat in the back and I'm starting to use some data. But actually, you probably would have been better off not doing that because you could be actually detrimentally impacting your flock. So I get really jumpy about people that start using data to select their commercial ewe flock unless it's a full spectrum of data. And I think we can do this. I think we can get a weaning weight. If the EIDs go in at, well, firstly, you need to make sure that you record who's a single and a twin and whether they're out of maiden and whether they're out of a mixed age ewe. So that's the goal. The first thing, if you're going to start selecting for ewes in your commercial flock, you have to know what their birth type is and you have to know how old their mum was. And that's not that hard. If you're preg scanning and you as you're lamb marking, you record those, you can knock their ears or you can record those EIDs. But you need to get that information because it's lost. If you box those mobs, it's gone forever and you really are pretty much give up after that in terms of that drop. You start again next year. If you've done that, then weaning weight should be pretty simple. It doesn't have to be done on the day of weaning. Everyone tells me how busy they are at weaning, because they are. But you can actually get them back a week later or whatever, that first drench, get a weight on them. And so that sets you up for knowing where they grew early. This one I reckon is critical, 8 to 12 month condition score. What Chad was talking about, we select for fat and muscle to get condition score. So by definition, if we get condition score, we've got fat and muscle. And that's when I class a sheep, when I'm on a commercial place or on a stud place looking at a ewe, the first thing I do is put my hand on the spine, work out what the condition is, because that sets my brain right. If I feel bones, I'm going, I want to find something else to colour that ewe on. If I feel she's in pretty good order, then I'm looking for another positive virtue to go forward with it. Because that, right then, before they've lambed, before they've done anything else, there's an opportunity that their condition score is pretty much their genetics of fat and muscle. And they are very highly correlated. So that's a great thing to do in your commercial flock. Very few stud classes do it. Same time, 8 and 12 month weight, so that thing can be collected together. Fleece weight and micron, we're not pretending that's not important. It's just, it just has to be in balance. And then if they're joining as a ewe lamb, pregnancy scanning result, wet, dry, that sort of stuff can come into it as well. And all of that information should come into that selection strategy. So again, if you want to go absolute gold standard in a sheep farming business, then we need to get right into the whole data side of the equation. And that's it. I went too fast, or what?
Heaps of time questions for me.
Right, any questions? Well.
Yeah, is there any technology solution to conditions for it?
No. Well, you were born with two. So there is a bit of development. So New South Wales DPI have developed, I think, some, but it hasn't been commercialised that I know of. But really, it's a hell of an easy process. And I know there's value in automating it. And Yeah, there's been a bit of work, but nothing that I know that's commercial unless someone wants to correct me. But.
Yeah, with long-term data, with feeding the skinny twins or something that's not in condition, are you breeding an animal that's requiring feeding all the time, so therefore you're going to feed more and more animals, so genetically, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question was, yeah, if I manage my skinny ones better, does that I just encourage average performance or poor performance by giving them a leg up all the time? We've got clients that will record that, and if they do it twice, then they're out. Often those ewes at skinny at weaning have just lactated their hearts out and they've weaned heavy twins. So that's, whereas we would normally go up the draft and kick her into touch because she's looking a bit crap, but there's a big shiny one there that looks better. The big shiny one killed her lamb at 48 hours, and that one that brought in twin lambs, you've just culled her because she's no good. So it's trying to, yeah, you're right, there's a risk that we will encourage mediocrity. But I think generally you've got sheep on your farm, and you can, if she's there as a 3 or 4 year old ewe, you've invested in that ewe. You've either got to get rid of her or get her back up to speed. And if you're increasing numbers or you haven't got room to find another ewe to replace her, then feeding her up is going to, because her risk is if you don't feed her up, there's a good chance both her lambs are dead and she's dead. So at that point, at preak scanning, your bases are loaded. You've got to do something about trying to get an outcome from that ewe. So you're right, we have to be careful about how we do that. But there's a commercial side of the equation, then a ewe selection side of the equation. Someone's on aeroplane mode.
I've got a question from Facebook here from Jason Shawls. How far can we push positive fat? We all hear about wastage of the kill flora in cattle. We know the benefits of fat in the system, but how far can we take it?
Good question, Jason, from South Aussie. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we've got rams I was looking at last night out to 4.5 for fat in terms of breeding value. That's pretty out there. But again, we're not, it's about how you run that system. And so what I talk about is balancing fat with growth. So early growth, you want to be, if you're building growth at the same time, you're killing at a younger age, and therefore they haven't gone to fat. Last time I did the correlation across all of industry, you couldn't get outside that 2 to 4 fat score grid based on the genetics of fat. We might be pushing out there now, but again, we have to manage that. Our sheep, if we're in a merino, none of us are genetically as fat as some of the other composite sheep and shedding sheep out there. So it's just about how you manage that as an enterprise. The fat and muscle is there to build those ewes, to maintain condition, to maintain your stocking rate. And so if you just let everything get a beast, and you don't run them at the appropriate stocking rate, then it is a waste. So it's just about giving you a bit of a buffer because sometimes we drop the ball. I know it's amazing to think, but sometimes we drop the ball. We have to go do something else. We're harvesting. We've got jobs on, and we lose out, and they lose condition, and those sheep the fatter ones just protected. So I don't think there's no linear relationships in biology. Eventually, you cap out the value, and we may be getting close to that. We're in a position every year we generate sheep that have never been bred before. They've never existed before, so we don't know really what we're playing with. We will get to the end, and that's why I'm encouraging people to know their numbers, because we want to know that stuff. We want to get feedback. Hang on, we're starting to plateau. We're not getting value out of that. We're already shifting our focus away from driving just fat and muscle we've always been balanced, but now it's things like worms and dags and other health traits that are important to us. So we've got enough fat and muscle. Yes, we can keep tweaking it up, but let's get rid of dags. Let's reduce our reliance on drenches. Let's make sure we've got no fly strike. So there's a whole heap of other stuff. Let's get the feet right. So there's other stuff that, like here at Mumblebone, we'll be focusing on because we've sort of done that fat and muscle job, and there's time to move on to other jobs. So yeah, it's a good question, Jason, and we don't know the absolute cutoff, and there is no cutoff because it'll change with environment, but yeah, we've got other things to go on now that we've got fat pretty sorted.
Is there any correlation with only keeping all your replacements out of ewe lambs, like twinners?
Twin ewe lambs or just twinners generally? Yep.
Born twin?
Yep. So yep, yes, favourably correlated. So yeah, it's genetic. There's a lot of noise in that. So those traits are only sort of 5% heritable. So there's 95% other stuff. But if you just keep doing it year on year, unfortunately Tim Mullen couldn't make it, but he has done that, and he's just year on year kept twins, retained twins, those that twin, those that made it as ewe lamb, that heavy reproduction focused, and his reproduction is just on a sailing ahead of the industry. It's what the Romney game did in New Zealand. Well, they used a bit of Finn stuff as well. They cheated a bit, but generally just selected on twinning. Yeah, so you get it. It's more effective if you select on on that weaning rate breeding value, like your rams, there's a WR breeding value down there on those rams. That's how you bring the reproduction genetics into your ewe flock, and then you can select on those that mate as a ewe lamb and those that twin as a maiden or whatever. That's a pretty good. I've got a graph from Marama Station where Emma's from that. I think those that twinned as a maiden scanned at 175, whereas those that were single as a maiden scanned at 135 in that following year. So yeah, it definitely sets you up. Both phenotypically you'll get better production, and then genetically you'll make some gain as well. Any more questions?
What's the optimum ram joining percentage?
We run on 1.5%. For ewe lambs, it's more like 3. For ram breeders, they say 4 or 5%. But
At least.
I mean, we've got people that get away with 0.75, but generally we say 1.5. So 1 to 100 plus 1, or they certainly will do it. But you don't. It depends on the environment a bit. If they're chucked in a containment and they don't have to go too far, you can get away with higher numbers. But if they're running around on these hills and getting lost in rocks and stuff, you obviously have to have ram ewe contact. Young ewes are different. They don't seek the ram. Adult ewes will seek the ram. There's an experiment where the ram was tied up and the whole lot of all the ewes still got pregnant. I always be a bit nervous telling that story. I don't get Chad too excited this time of day, but yeah, so yeah, 1.5% is the short answer. A lot of people will go on 2 to. I mean, the last thing you want is dry ewes because you didn't put enough rams out. But equally, mostly we're trying to put out good rams, so 1.5% will do it.
Depend on the joining length too.
Yeah, joining length is important. If you're teasing, then you put more pressure on those rams. So a 2-week tease will synchronise them a bit. And so I've certainly been guilty of stuffing that up for a client where we didn't have enough ram pressure in, where we teased them and then we went for a 4-week joining and we missed by another 3 or 4 days. We would have got about 10-15% more pregnant. So good learning experience. Lucky I'm well insured.
What is the optimum joining?
5 weeks is a standard answer. You don't need any more than 5 weeks. And if you're joining before sort of mid-January, then a 2-week tease and then 5-week joining. If you're joining in November, then you can either go sort of 7 weeks with the rams in, or 2-week tease is better and then rams in. But because the first couple of weeks the ram will be just as a teaser almost. But to get all the stuff that I was talking about, knowing your numbers, getting your metrics right, if you've got any more than 5 weeks of lambing, it's bloody hard to get nutrition right across those different times. If you've got a 7 or 8 week joining, you've got ewes that are sort of, whatever that is, 56 days. So you've got ewes that are day 90 of pregnancy, and you've got ewes that are already into peak lactation in the same mob. Like it's a very different scenario energetically. So the shorter you make that, and then obviously age scanning, you can tighten that up a bit. But most people that age scan get pretty frustrated with their scanner. Like you need to get a good scanner to be able to separate out those different groups, because it doesn't take many wrong to stuff up the whole advantage for that.